release for Platform9. I've got Chris Paap and Anmol Sachan. I think I said it right, Anmol. I think we haven't met in person yet. And Mike Petersen. We're gonna go ahead and show off some of the 5.6 stuff. Like I said, let Chris introduce himself real quick, and then we'll move over to Anmol so that you can meet our guests.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Paap. I'm product manager, focusing on Edge Cloud, and within Edge Cloud, I also focus on virtualization and bare metal. Glad to be here.
Anmol.
And hey everyone, this is Anmol. I work as a product manager at Platform9. I take care of our Kubernetes stack and some of the new things we're going to bring to you. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Let's go ahead and get started and show it off. You want me to go ahead and show your screen there, Chris?
Yes, it's going.
All right, let's do it. There we go. All right, this is 5.6.
Yeah, so what I'm going to show, so there's a couple big things that I'll jump into. With 5.5, we added new UI, right? The whole goal of Platform9, if you're familiar with it, is like we try to take something that's very hard to do, Kubernetes, just inherently working with different open source projects, and deliver on the promise of Kubernetes, but we try to make it easier for the end user to do, right? And help them manage that, whether it's just intuitive UI or making things just easier to deploy. And then with our, award-winning support on the back end to help you when things go bump in the night, as one of our coworkers says. So
it's a lot lighter. Is this is new in this one, or this light theme is newer from the last release?
This is newer from, so we added like a dark theme and a light theme in the last release. Yeah. I have a light theme going right now. I'm kind of going anti-dark since I went anti-light, so I'm flipping for a while. But with the last release, what we did, we added this application picker. And so we did where now you could kind of go through in this application picker, and you have like Kubernetes and before, and that KubeVirt, Metal Cube, Argo CD. With 5.6, we also broke out infrastructure and as well as Kubernetes. So it's self-explanatory, but if you're trying to look into an infrastructure and kind of go check out your clusters and see what clusters you have deployed, you can go through here. You can see what Kubernetes versions you're running, and true to form, like talking about things that make it easier to do. We make upgrades easier to do. So one of the things that we released with 5.6, and Anmol can jump into it more, is with the 5.6 release, we supported 1.2.2 and 1.2.3 versions of Kubernetes.
So notice the little new thing on there. So most of the stuff that you're going to see when you log in and see 5.6 is going to have the new next to it, like CAPI and stuff like that, or
yeah. You actually jumped right to it. So when we jump into infrastructure, that whole infrastructure tab is new, but within infrastructure, it's not the same as it was before. And Anmol will jump into it a little bit deeper, but you'll notice that you'll see not just clusters total, number of clusters, but you'll see we had imported before, and those are clusters that are imported in from AWS. But we now support Cluster API, otherwise known as CAPI. And so CAPI brings forth a lot of capabilities, one of which is the ability now to not just, we could bring in and import EKS and have it from an observability standpoint, but now with CAPI, AWS supports CAPI, we can actually bring an EKS cluster in, an environment in, and then control the whole life cycle of that cluster, right? So it adds another dimension to it.
Now on the tabs, you have infrastructure? Was there Kubernetes isn't up there by itself anymore? It's just infrastructure.
Kubernetes is up there by itself. So you have
cool.
You still have the pods views, you have your workloads, your deployments, your replica set. So you still have that, but we separated kind of the structure out. So if you're thinking about just, hey, what are the nodes that are out there, right? And you want to go look at what nodes you have in this KubeVirt cluster. You kind of come in here and see the 3 nodes that are associated to it. You see the health, right? The node cube version. You can go view Grafana from here. A lot of different things. I don't have a CAPI cluster in mind, but you'd be able to click on CAPI cluster. The traditional way of deploying a cluster that we have using KubeVirt, this is what we have from Legacy. That's what we term Legacy. So I do want to make something clear. We are still supporting the KubeVirt version. We're not taking it out. We're not forcing you to move to CAPI. It's very use case specific. So we're encouraging you to use CAPI. We think it's great. And I think
where's my Migrate button? Is there a Migrate button yet, or is that coming?
No Migrate Legacy. We're gonna have to talk to Anmol about that. Not yet, right? So, but when you go add cluster, like you'll see and create a cluster. Say if we do Amazon Web Services, you'll see new generation AWS cluster using Kubernetes cluster API, or you'll see the standard way to do it using KubeVirt, right? So if you use the standard way of doing it, you're going to be able to create an AWS EC2 instance, but you're not going to be able to create and manage an EKS and cluster.
So it's still going to be supported, but it's going to go away as an option eventually for creating a new cluster. So everything kind of migrates to CAPI.
Correct, and we're not doing that yet. I mean, we don't have a deadline to do that, but as we start getting adoption from customers, we'll start notifying them and giving them plenty of heads up to do that. There's also going to be how we do it, right? Whether it be a migration path, we're talking about that, or if it's a matter of bringing up a whole new cluster and then populating that cluster, right? So different ways. I'm going to jump into my forte, what I was excited about. So I was excited about this whole release, and one of the things about this release is this is one of our biggest. 5.5 was the biggest release that we had. We had a lot of changes, a whole new UI, a whole new way of doing things, a lot of functionality. 5.6, massive increases in like support for Kubernetes 1.2.2, 1.2.3, CAPI clusters, KubeVirt. We did a big update for KubeVirt as well. So it went from version 4.5 to version 5.5. And then as well, we started adding some UI. And what you're going to see over the next couple of releases, we have another release coming out, is you're going to see additional feature functionality added from the UI standpoint. So the idea that we're looking at this is if you're trying to adopt KubeVirt, and the whole reason if nobody's used KubeVirt before, KubeVirt's very new. KubeVirt is KVM under the covers, except it's KVM running in Kubernetes. And the benefit of that is it provides a very pragmatic way or a very pragmatic approach to bring your virtual environment into the Kubernetes infrastructure. So if you have a use case of you're thinking about going cloud native and you're very heavily virtualization, or you have some cloud native, you have some containers, you have some virtualization, you're trying to simplify the stack and combine it in one, KubeVirt gives you that ability. KVM is very, very mature, right? It basically runs the internet. So if you look at any of the hyperscalers out there, other than obviously Azure, they're running on KVM or Zen. And so very stable, very mature. KubeVirt's that has a lot of contributors to it. And so it's essentially you're running a VM in a pod in Kubernetes. So you're taking advantage of all the being able to manage it using Kubernetes management tools, and also the single pane of glass, right, environment. And you're able to run a VM next to a container. It's not a bolt-on. And the benefit of that is it gives you the ability to still take advantage of Kubernetes, but gives the application group time to like decompose an application, right? So if a company has hundreds of applications and they're trying to containerize them, that takes a while, and they have to validate that as it comes up. So you don't have to wait to move to Kubernetes to do that. The other thing about that too is if you have an application that's just never going to be containerized, and you have a couple instances where that can happen. One is if it's an application that it's generally older applications where if it's a support structure, they just won't support it unless it's running on a certain type of VM OS and very specific. Other types, say it's an application that requires a GPU or it requires BIOS from a virtual machine. There are instances like that for like licensing to run or something similar. It's just an application that's always going to be a VM. So it gives that ability to still take advantage of Kubernetes, but you have that VM running in the environment, and you're able to still take advantage of the high performance features that are available. So
if you're interested in hearing a discussion about it too, our last State of Cloud Native went over some of the stuff with KubeVirt too. So that'll give you a little bit of an idea before jumping in and messing around with it if you want something else to watch. And then we got some demos on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, there's a lot of great information out there. What we did with 5.6, and we're going to continue with 5.7, is when you see this, we wanted a dashboard that's very clean, lots of good information, network information, guest OS, what cluster it's sitting on, the host it's actually sitting on, which is very important when you live migrate, which is akin to a vMotion, and the labels associated to in the namespace, whether it's running or not, the VMI phase. So another thing about virtual machines, you have the actual virtual machine that's the static configuration, like memory, CPU, storage, and the VMI is actually the front end or like the bare minimum to run that virtual machine in a pod, and that is actually what gets migrated across the VMs.
So for the guest OS, you need what? KEMU guest tools or something like that, or
so there's actually guest tools running on the OS, and it'll give like the type of OS that's running. Like in this version, it's CentOS 8, and then I have this other one running CentOS 7, right?
So it's not required, but it's a good thing to add to your images if you want to see it, right? Like
and by default, if you bring up that VM and you bring it up in the environment, just if you go to add virtual machine and you kind of go through and set it up to kind of just go through the standard options in here. When you set it up using the configuration wizard, it will actually actually install that for you, right? So it's not something you have to go into the machine afterwards. I created this demo one, right, just prior to this session, and I didn't have to go in and add it. Qvert actually did it for us, right? But once you create images, and once in the future, as we start having that capability for images, it's something that'll be baked in. You'll always have. An example of like some cool things that we added that wasn't here before, other than changing up that initial view, is we added information that we just didn't have before, just to make it easier for the admin when they're coming in here to see what's going on and be able to manage it. If we kind of go across the top here, you now have the ability to kind of go into a console. So it's a KVM console, and go into that and check it out.
Are you gonna show it off? Is it working? You show it off?
I wanted to show it off, but you have to. One of the key tenets of it is that you have to be on that network. Or in our case, where we're set up, since I'm at home, I have to VPN in, and I was afraid the VPN, if I connected VPN, we might have a drop off.
Makes sense.
And you're able to migrate the VM too. So if you want to migrate the VM, so that's live migration. Qvert, just Qvert will actually choose the destination of which host in the cluster it'll go to. It'll look to make sure if you have any CPU pinning, if the new host that it goes to can support it, or to make sure you don't have any like host affinity. So it'll choose it for you. You can still control it, like by setting affinity or by setting certain tags up that are associated with, like, only migrate to these hosts. So there are ways around that. You just don't have the ability to connect to that particular host when you go to live migrate.
So I think that's one of the questions that I've seen before too, is like, so this is mostly for, like you said, you gotta be in the same network. This is mostly for bare metal. Is there support for AWS or anything like that yet? Or is that like in the future?
That's a great question. There is. The Qvert project actually supports it. The open source project supports it. We have it and we run it, but in that case, it's the nested virtualization. And what we always tell people when they're trying it, if you want to try it out in your labs, great, but the expectation is, like, when you're running nested virtualization, you're just not going to have the performance. And when we see people kicking the tires on this, I generally see it at the edge, and then they have high performance requirements, especially if they're doing something and taking advantage of low latency network configurations like SRIOV or OVS or DPDK. It's not something that they're willing to do. But yes, you can. In fact, we allow it, and it's not something that we're blocking. It's actually part of the open source project.
But this is like, this is better if you control your hardware and you know everything that you have, so that you can kind of take advantage of, like you said, pass-through pinning and stuff, like CPU pinning and stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly. And in the next release, what we're going to do, you can do all that in using the YAML files and configurations. Like, if we go to the YAML here of the virtual machine, you can actually go through here and set up and enable the state, or enable the feature gate for CPU pinning. And in that case, when you use CPU pinning, you're actually using Kubernetes CPU manager, right? So it's actually assigning it to the using the CPU capabilities of pinning using the actual Kubernetes dedicated CPU placement.
So I'll say, let me ask you something, Chris, since in case people missed it, since we don't have a little new tag above that. So the console's new, Migrate VM's new.
Migrate console new, Migrate VM. We had to delete, we had to restart, stop. Another thing that's new is events. So if you wanted to see something that was going on in your environment, you actually had to go to the actual Vert launcher pods, right? There's actually 3 different locations to pull logs from, which isn't ideal, right? If you have a troubleshooting scenario, you came in, you want to know why the VM shut down or what happened, why it restarted in the middle of the night during like an important process. You have to go into 3 different areas and actually go into the logs themselves and pull it out. What we're doing is we're actually pulling from those 3 logs, and it actually show up here. Like, for instance, if I go in here and I stop this VM, it should start showing up in the logs that you'll start seeing delete virtual machine pod, stop the virtual machine. And if I go back now and start it, you'll start seeing as we refresh.
So since it's a pod, like, it's deleting the pod, getting rid of it, but you've got storage behind it, so you can bring the VM back up and you still have state.
Yeah. So that's the idea. That's the idea of running just a VMI where it's not static. But if you need something with persistence, that's where virtual machines come into play, right? You're using persistent storage, versus like pods may not have persistent storage. They'll run VMIs, don't have to have persistent storage. They'll have ephemeral disks sometimes, and you have those options still. But most of the time when we see people using Qvert, they want a persistent VM with persistent storage, right? They want.
That's a question I was going to ask: is what use cases of VMI hit the most? Are like you're bringing a VM up, you're running something, and then you're just shutting it down. So you're just trying to. It's like a job almost in Kubernetes or something like that.
Yeah, and when you go and create, if you notice, like, if we go and try to create a new VM, you'll see at the very beginning the run strategy. So when I create this VM and I create it, you can set it to manual, or you can have it run just like a container to rerun off failure. Say it goes down, it'll come right back up, right? Or something happens, it'll just automatically bring that up like a container would. Or you can just always have it on. Like once it's running, it's always staying on. So if something happens in your environment, and so some people are thrown off by that, right? When they're still used to a virtual machine doing a virtual machine, not a virtual machine or a pod. So all the pod capabilities and rules, tags, everything like that apply.
So maybe I've got like an application that only needs to run once a week to go through like records and send me an email out like on a Sunday or something like that. It only runs in a Windows VM.
If you want to do that, yeah. And in fact, KubeVirt will support. They'll support Linux, or it will support Windows as well, right? So we'll do that. So it's a benefit.
Awesome.
So I walked through that. Before we had some disk information, and it was just logical disk. Now we walk you through like the name, the type. Most of like when we talk about persistent disks, persistent disks are data volumes. And then we'll have capacity, access mode. Access mode is important because if you want to live migrate, you need to have it read write many. If you have read write once, you cannot live migrate. It won't let you do it.
Do we have suggested things yet for that? Like, because I remember like the first time I did it, we had a lot of information in there, and for a person who's new with like launching a VM with storage, it was kind of hard to figure out what storage should I use. Do we have like suggestions like for I got Ceph backing it, you should maybe use this? Like, is there defaults yet, or maybe that's
no, not yet. So what we have are like when you create a VM and you kind of go through those steps, like say add VM, and we'll kind of go through it right real quick. We'll just like default virtual machine run strategy manual. Go through here. Here we kind of walk you through the wizard, and then you have different options. Like if you want to run it as a storage class, right? We have the ability, and then you have the different options kind of in here what you want to do, and it gives you some information. If you want to clone an existing disk is an option, for instance, or attach an existing disk is another option. But if you want to import, what you're doing is just putting the URL of where that image resides, and that's how I usually set it up.
So you like point to like a Ubuntu cloud image, but I still need to know what access read write, like what access mode I need to use for the storage I'm using. Or like, so that's something I need to make sure that I understand before.
Yeah, that's something. So like if you're going to read write once, I mean, just that one host is going to write to that disk. Read write many means that there's going to be multiple points of writing to that disk. And so what happens at that point is if you have it read write many, that is a requirement along with masquerade. In fact, if we go to the next, let's go clone. If you go to the next screen and you can set like, let's just set this up and instead of talking about it, I'll show you. When you go to network mode, so the two requirements for live migration, it's that you have read write many for the disk and that your binding mode for the pod network is masquerade, meaning if you set it to bridge, and we actually give you an update up here, if you set it to bridge, it's not going to let you live migrate. So the two requirements when you're setting up a VM are how the storage is written to and the type of pod network that's attached to it. When you go a secondary or third network, if you've set up like network attached definitions, in this case, what we have here is OVS, you can set up a secondary network. We can do that within Platform9 using Luigi, which is our advanced networking options. Pretty much anything that requires a second network card in it requires Multis, which is provided by Luigi. Or if you want to set up SRIOV or OVS, for instance, or you need to run IPVLAN or MAC VLAN, all those things can be configured within Luigi, and then you set up a network attached definition, and those network attached definitions will show up here, and you can select.
So the wizard looks pretty good. Yeah, all this looks really good compared to our first rendition of this two versions back. Like it's come a long way.
Yeah, the whole idea is to make it easier for somebody who's used to working in the UI. Maybe they hadn't used or lightly used KVM and they're not used to using YAMLs, right? Maybe they have one foot in the Kubernetes world and they're kind of getting used to it. But they're primarily a virtual admin, right? The traditional infrastructure admin. It allows them to go in there and you have a learning tool. So if you kind of go through that and set that environment up and you want to see what it looks like and you went through that wizard, you can see what that looks like from a YAML perspective. If you change the name of the VM or you want to see where, in this case, here's the image that we used, to set that up. That's where that would all show up, and it kind of you can use it as a learning tool. The other thing,
copy this and template it out somewhere else, right? Like, and then you'll be able to use the UI just to view what I've created.
Yeah, and the other thing too here is if I look at YAML as an advanced configuration, you're going to see that in future releases too. The reason for that is if you have very specific configurations of something that's not available in UI, that's like some deep dive stuff. Like today, if you wanted to do CPU pinning, you'd have to go in here and set up CPU pinning. In the future, you'll see that as an option within the UI, right? So those are things that we're just trying to make easier, just as a general rule of thumb, just make it easier for the end user to adopt and use, and then kind of use the advanced functionality as they learn and get more used to leveraging the value and benefits of Kuber.
Anmol, you got anything to add? Have you seen? You've seen some of this stuff, I'm sure, already, like a bunch of times.
Absolutely, and Chris covered it fantastically. Yeah,
awesome.
It is. If you want to run VMs, and if you are coming from a place where you cannot containerize your application so soon, KubeVirt is the place, and what Chris presented is absolutely fantastic to use.
Awesome.
So Anmol, why don't you? I kind of touched a little bit on infrastructure and the breakout of infrastructure and clusters. Tell me like the benefits. I mean, I touched at the 50,000 foot overview, right, of CAPI. And for those of you who don't know, Anmol's our CAPI expert. Like he led the effort to integrate CAPI, and CAPI is widely adopted. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like all the hyperscalers supported, AWS, GCP,
Azure,
all supported. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And so if you want to jump into it.
Yeah, let me get Anmol's thing up real quick right before I'm AFK for a second, and then come right back after this.
Right. Should I go and share my screen?
Yeah, go and share screen, and I'll pop it up on the page.
All right.
All right. All right. So you got what you want up. All right. I'm gonna add it, and there we go. And I'll be right back in a second to keep asking distracting questions.
All right. Hey, everyone. So as Chris mentioned before you, we got some really exciting changes this time into our product. And first one we do see is on the top left, which here Chris covered briefly about the app switcher. So app switcher is the place where you can switch between different application spaces. So the way this is designed is to help you manage as a Kubernetes administrator different services and different types of services which you have, which we support today, right? So if you wanted to, as a Kubernetes admin, if you wanted to look at your whole infrastructure in one view, this is what we have brought in this release for you. So this is where you'll see about which clusters you have, how many of them, how many cloud providers have you registered, how many nodes do you have today running and the setup, and something exciting here on the right side that if you have any, if this is always empty, it's a good news that you don't have any issues, right? And if you have any issues coming up from any clusters, they're going to pop up right here for you. What you have done again for you, if you're running some critical workloads on a particular cluster, and if you want to always have a view of it, you can always have a look at it. So you can actually mark that cluster as a favorite, and this will just give you a view of how many nodes and pods this is running, how's the cluster doing, if there's any issue with this cluster. So if you see there's an add-on health issue, so you just know it really quickly that, okay, there's an add-on health issue, I can just go look at it and figure out what's wrong with it, and probably I can fix it as well, right? So here you can set your favorite clusters. And as Chris
the new
said,
thing, the new thing here is like the customization of your dashboard when you come in. Like before, we just kind of had like a basic thing where you had a couple of things up on the circles and stuff at the top, and you could customize a little bit. But now you're saying there's more customization. I hit on the bottom to hit hide on the studio thing just so we can see the whole screen.
Okay, sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you're saying we can customize it more. We can do all kinds of cool stuff. I like the favorite cluster thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is, and you can mark up to 3 clusters as your favorites. So if you're running subcritical production workloads, you can always mark them here, right? Now,
is this user based or is this like for everybody? So like, say if I log in, is this per user, or like anybody that logs in is going to get the same view, so I can customize it for all my engineers?
Yeah, it's for everyone. So it's basically controlled by your admin. Yes. All right, cool. And then you have an alarms view here, which tells you if there are any alarms going on right now. I have 2 clusters which are active and 1 cluster which is which I just deleted so that I could show you the deleting phase as well. So yeah, I see there's no problem here. Everything looks good. There are no issues here. Then add as a Kubernetes admin on Platform9, I'm happy with what's going on here, right? So yeah. So now, if what Chris introduced about cluster API. So cluster API is, or CAPI as we call it, right? CAPI is a project started out of the special interest group called SIG Lifecycle in the Kubernetes community itself. So the aim of Cluster API is to automate and automate the cluster lifecycle management and to make it declarative. And what I mean by declarative is just like when you have to create a pod or you have to create a full deployment of some application, you would create a deployment, add pod list to it, containers list to it, and then you just go do a kubectl create on a Kubernetes cluster, and then it will bring up all of your services in that particular deployment, right? That's the experience that Cluster API brings to you while you create your Kubernetes cluster. So, stating that, let's look at how Cluster API clusters look and how you can create one. So before we go ahead, I just wanted to show you this as well. So what we have done this time is, since we have now a couple of type of clusters coming in, which we will help you manage on Platform9, we have divided clusters into 3 categories. So one will be CAPI, or Cluster API clusters. One are legacy, the ones which other ones which run on a technology which we have developed in-house called KubeVirt. So all the Bare OS type of clusters, the AWS and Azure, which are non-CAPI, will come under this. Just like I have a Bare OS cluster running in, and then you have imported clusters where you can import your EKS, AKS, and GKE clusters, which you have already created, and you can bring that here. So yeah, that's the view of common view of all of the clusters, and you can, as an admin, you can just see what's going on in your infrastructure.
So what are you most excited about for CAPI? Does it makes it easier for me to template out clusters and get stuff deployed, or?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the most exciting thing. And before we just started, right before 2 minutes of this call, I just spun up a new cluster called demo AWS2, so I can show you how clusters start coming up, and I can show you different states, how it happens. So till now, with the AWS clusters, they were kind of black box, and users had to wait that clusters will come up, and once they come up, they could use them. But now you can actually see what's happening with each cluster and what all steps have happened, right? So the way we have defined the cluster creation is, actually, let me take you back before we create to the cluster create flow, the one which Chris showed you before. So once you hit your create clusters in the clusters tab, you come on down to AWS Amazon Web Services. This is where we show you the new view of how you can create CAPI clusters.
So is CAPI just Amazon and Microsoft right now? It's not like Bare OS or anything like that.
It's actually only Amazon right now, and we helped users create the native AWS clusters plus EKS clusters. So we are bringing in EKS lifecycle management with Cluster API to our users, so that they can just not import clusters of type EKS, but they can also create and manage their lifecycle from Platform9 itself. So that's what we're bringing for that with this release. Okay, and so first, let's just quickly go ahead and look at cluster creation flow. What all new features we have provided as in terms of configuration to users. So yeah, once you come onto Amazon Web Services, you come onto PF9 managed Kubernetes cluster, you choose new generation AWS cluster, and you hit start configuration. So this is where the new exciting part about exposing the clusters as declarative APIs to the users comes in. So what you see on the left is the whole UI, which helps you create a cluster, and what you see on the right are the actual declarative YAMLs that will construct your clusters, and there will be a couple of YAMLs that will construct the clusters. So we're going to look how they look like, right? So first step is to just come in and create your clusters. I will just call this as demo AWS -3, and I've registered a few cloud providers, so I'll just use one of them, and then I'll go ahead and so if you're using this for the first time, you'll have to register a cloud provider. Without using a cloud provider, you would not be able to create a cluster. And registering cloud provider is just about adding your AWS secret and access key to Platform9.
So the difference, I got a question for you. The difference between this and the EKS is this going to create VMs and then deploy Kubernetes on those for me, whereas EKS is going to create a managed EKS version of Kubernetes, right? So like, is there more options in this one? This one takes a little bit more configuration than the EKS side does, or?
Yes, absolutely. If you want to have true control of your Kubernetes cluster on AWS, you choose the AWS new generation CAPI clusters. If you want to If you want an EKS cluster which manages everything for you, from the master nodes to worker nodes and everything just is managed for you, and then you want to leverage Platform9 on top of it to use our add-ons and use our UI to manage it. That's where you come in with EKS. So yeah, and you have a lot of options which we have enabled with you for you as well, for both AWS and EKS. So I'll just quickly show you all the options. So first option, first things you have is now configuration of the VPC itself. Till now, and we have two options here. If you have your own VPC which you have created, and you want to create a cluster in that, you can choose the self-managed VPC, and you can fill out your VPC details here, and we will create a cluster on that VPC, right? But for most of the users who do not want to create their own VPC, we will create it for you in your AWS account using the cloud provider which you have registered with Platform9. So you just choose PMK managed, and then you describe basically the options for VPC, like VPC CIDR block, how the CIDR block should VPC look like, in what availability zones the VPC should span. So I'll choose US West 2A, 2B, and 2C. And then you can
say for people that are new to this, so what I've done so far before you even made it to this wizard, all I've done is I've set up an account with AWS. I've probably created a couple SSH keys, right? Like, and then I've set up maybe some permissions, and then with that information, I've just added that as a provider to PMK or Platform9. I've added it there, and then this is going to do everything else for me. Like, I've got nothing in AWS except for like some of my IAM stuff, right?
Yes,
this is going to That's good. This is going to do everything for me, basically, right?
Yes, this is going to do everything for you. Just have to register your cloud provider with us, give us enough permission to create resources in your AWS account, and you're good to go from there. And from there, we'll do the rest of everything in terms of your AWS cluster on your AWS account. So, awesome. And you can come in and configure your whole cluster with this cluster creation flow. So that's what I'm taking you through here. And then you can obviously configure your subnets. If you want to do some manual configuration, you can do it. We have default subnet configuration available for you. You can add more private subnets if you want. If by default there's only going to be one public and private subnet for each availability zone. After that, you can actually configure the AWS load balancer that's going to come up for your control plane, right? And you can choose, it should be internet facing, it should be just a private internal AWS load balancer, which just lets connection from the inside of the VPC. You can choose that, and then you can choose cross-zone load balancing, which is an option again given by AWS for the load balancers. And one new thing which we have added and which will be really useful for the customers is tags. So till now, whenever you create an AWS cluster, it's a bit difficult to assess and to audit the resources which have been created with your AWS clusters in your AWS account. With tags, what you can do is you can just add a new tag, and you can add a key, and you can, let's say, key one, and then, or let's make it real, right? So let's call it environment, env, and let's call it prod. So now these tags will be applied for all the resources on the AWS, which will be created for this cluster, so that when you're auditing your AWS account for, let's say, costs or for security purposes, you always know which clusters have created which resources.
It seems helpful too, like if you let your developers loose on this and you're like, hey, developers, you can go create your own cluster, they can put their name in here so that you know who's created what, right? Like, because you don't have that information in AWS anymore because you're creating it through a single user, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're servicing hundreds of developers in a company, how do you see which developers created which clusters? So if you have a defined way of naming these tags, then it should be really easy for you as an admin to do an audit quickly.
Say my previous role, we just had 100 my clusters, and then you have no idea who created it. So doing auditing was awful, right? Like, and then data privacy laws came in too, so you can't necessarily see who created the cluster because that's information that could cross like I don't know, countries and stuff like that. So yeah, this is super helpful.
Yeah, and you can add actually more tags here as well if you want. So yeah, and it's not just limited to one tag. You can add multiple tags here.
The always popular tag, do not delete.
Yes, absolutely. Like if you're running something critical, if you don't want people to touch it, you add that tag there. All right, let's move on. So so I was talking about the cluster creation. So the way we have divided cluster creation is in 5 phases for users. You choose you first choose what's going in your infrastructure as an AWS, and then you go on configuring your control plane, and after that you do a worker roles. So we have some more new options for
I have
control
a question
plane as
for
well
you. So
now.
the difference Anmol between the last release and this release is that I didn't see anything about Route 53 in there. Is that coming up later, or is that different now, or is that?
It's actually, it was hidden a little bit before, but we have now exposed it much better to the users, so they can use it now. I mean, this was always there, but we just made it more explicit to the users so that they know what they're doing with that. Yeah. And and then in the control plane, you configure how many replicas you want, what Kubernetes version you want for this cluster, what operating system you want to run it, and we're currently supporting 3 operating systems here. And then we have options for using secret managers as well. So I'm gonna just go and choose a default one. And if you look closely, whenever I choose an option, there's a YAML on the right side, which keeps on getting updated. And this is what is declarative style of creating your Kubernetes cluster. So your Kubernetes cluster is not a black box anymore for you. You can see actually what's going into your Kubernetes cluster, and once it's created, you can always update it, right? So it's not just APIs anymore. It's actually declarative YAMLs, just like your applications. So that's what we're bringing to our users with this release.
Okay. I'm gonna break your flow one more time. For anybody watching, if you have questions, like if you want to ask a question about some of this, like what is this, or what do you guys think about that? Feel free to post questions in there. We're watching. We have a little chat overlay that we can see that'll show us the questions, so we should be able to answer them too. This is interactive in case you have anything. All right, Anmol, sorry.
Absolutely, no worries. I think questions are always welcome, and that's what we are here for. So, yeah, so I was saying that you have declarative YAMLs on the right side, which are constructing your cluster. Now, with the AWS, we have introduced something new here in terms of the CNI. So we are now supporting the AWS VPC CNI as well for creating your AWS cluster. So, which is a native CNI developed by AWS itself for creating clusters on AWS. And then we have made our XAD backup options for your Kubernetes cluster more explicit, so that you can define them in the way you want. You can use daily backups, you can use interval backups, you can use them both together if you have a use case like that. So that's something which you've made more explicit, so that our users know how to better configure them and how to enable or disable them whenever they want. Okay?
So
and then you have some
question about that, Anmol. So
yes.
even though this is an EKS environment, the end user, if they use CAPI, still has granular control over etcd backups. Is that correct?
No, for AWS, you have the granular control because this is what Platform9 brings in for you, that for etcd backup. When it comes to EKS, the whole control plane is managed by EKS itself. So, so there's no etcd backup there. Yeah.
So this is a benefit of using Platform9.
Absolutely. If you want your clusters to be the way you want, and if you want to have pure control on them, and if you want to keep them secure, you come to us and you use this. Yeah. And then you have some advanced option here is to configure your API server with different flags for different requirements. Right? So once you configure your control plane, you go next. Okay, if you have to disable it, obviously, if you're not using it, you go next, and then you configure your working node groups. So this is another thing which we have got for our users in the 5.6 release, and this is why this release has been very exciting for me, because Cluster API helps you now create multiple node groups in your Kubernetes cluster. So let's say if you have a couple of type of workloads that you want to keep separate on different workers. Now you can do that. And what you have here is our 2 type of node groups here: machine deployments and machine pools. Each has their own properties, so you would choose which type of node would you use for which use case. And once you do that, you can create multiple node groups of any type. So you can have 10 node groups in one Kubernetes cluster, and then you can segregate your workloads the way you want using your labels. So that's something which is really exciting for me, that as a value, as a product manager, I can bring for our users with this release. So let's go ahead and.
I got a question for you. I'm noticing on the right side, the YAML keeps getting updated every time we add something to it, so I can copy this information if I want to and use it. Is this
absolutely yes?
Yeah. Is this like CAPI stuff to where I could copy this and create something again using like command line, or? Am I using
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. You can
Awesome.
copy these YAMLs, and once the cluster is created, you can even download these YAMLs. So you can take and you can use these YAMLs to create another cluster of another format by changing just a few options there, and you'll have a new cluster ready by using those YAMLs.
And this is a CAPI update, right? Like you couldn't do this with a Qbert, so that's one of the advantages. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things on this too, Mike, is that the way that Platform 9 implemented CAPI, we didn't put any type of overlay. Like this is its native state. Like we are talking directly to the CAPI APIs. So if somebody wanted to take this out, it's not like communication was going to a mid layer, middleware before it talked to CAPI. I mean, we exposed full CAPI capabilities in our implementation on Platform 9.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. And with node groups, you have different features coming in. So it's not just like it's just node groups. Like what's the use of node groups? They don't have features. So you have spot instances now, so that you can save on your costs when you're running non-critical workloads. So you can run basically critical workloads on some node groups, and you can run non-critical workloads on some node groups, and you can choose it for each type of node group that you're creating. And obviously, auto scaling is a no-brainer for Kubernetes clusters, and we support cluster autoscaler with cluster API as well, right? So your nodes have always, so the workloads have always available the amount of CPU and memory which they want, right? So that they can scale up and down in terms of the nodes.
So that's pretty cool. So what you're telling me is that like if I do enable spot instances and I do this enable auto scaling, even if spot instances like there's a storm or whatever, like Chris Jones called it before, and everything goes away, it'll still make sure I at least have 3 nodes that are maybe not spot instances, but it'll prioritize spot instances if I select that.
Oh, that's a fantastic question, Mike, and I am glad that you asked me that. So if you wanted that use case, that you have wanted a minimum base capacity kind of thing, what you could do is you can just choose a machine pool type of node group, and this is where you can specify mixed instances. So what mixed instances brings you is something called as a base capacity. So basically, if you can always want 3 nodes to be available to service your workloads, and above those 3 nodes you can have the nodes as spot instances. This is what gives you the advantage. So your 3 nodes will always be available, and above that, if there is spot massacre, all of your spot instances get killed, you still will have 3 nodes to service your workloads.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's another option there. So it's called the spot allocation strategy. It's called lowest price or capacity optimized. So if you want to save cost, you can expect some downtime. But if you choose capacity optimized, that means that AWS will. So there's this auto scaling group that's sitting between this node group once it gets created, and that auto scaling group already knows when your nodes are coming down in terms of where spot massacre is going to happen, or when a spot pool is going to lose the quorum there. And it's going to proactively update your nodes, so you always have the base capacity available for you. Along with that, your spot instances come up much faster. So that's when you use machine pools, if you have that kind of a use case. Does that
feels almost like serverless for servers. Like it feels like Knative's min-max. It's kind of cool.
Yes, and then you have options for upgrade strategies. If you can, how many nodes you want to update in parallel, and then how many you can lose at the moment while upgrades are happening. You can always choose that. Another fantastic thing which we are bringing for users this release is the labels and tags. So with AWS clusters, you can label and you can have labels and tags on your node groups. So any node that becomes part of this node group will have these labels and tags by default on them, so that your workloads can honor these labels and tags. So this is where we help our customers do things like plan their whole cluster rollout, and then plan their application rollout as well altogether, so that they don't have to do these things manually, go into the CLI, do a kubectl node or something. They just label the node group, and all the node groups that are part of this node group will have these labels and tags. And even when they scale up and down, doesn't matter. It's always going to be there.
So what you're basically saying is CAPI's made your life a lot easier as a product manager.
Absolutely. And integrating this has been really exciting. It's been a tough job that we have done. But yeah, for our users, this brings a lot of value. And I'm happy that we are bringing this for our users. All right. Moving on. Okay, obviously you have to choose. There's another feature with the machine pools that you can choose the availability zone which you want your nodes to be limited to. That's why it did not let me move forward. It's asking me that, hey, tell me which availability zone these nodes should run to. So if you remember, in the control plane option, I chose 3 availability zones, but I can now choose a specific availability zones for my worker nodes only. So if you have a specialized kind of EC2 instance that's available on only one availability zone, you can now use this option to do that, so that you don't waste your other EC2 instances which are there by default sometimes in other availability zones. So that's one
That's
of the
pretty cool. Having the control plane wherever you want, and then having the workers special. That's really cool.
Yes, yeah, that provides real value to people on Kubernetes. Once you do that, these are Platform 9 supported add-ons which we deploy on your EKS cluster, AWS clusters, so that they're always supported for you. And then you just enable them. And once you enable them, each add-on itself is its own declarative resource. So if you see, whenever I add or remove an add-on, the resources will come. We keep adding or get removed. So this is what cluster API is. Everything is just declarative, and you can just copy them and create a new cluster if you want all of them. And once you choose your add-ons, you go ahead and you go to the next option, and then this is where you review. This is where you review all of your custom resources that will be part of this cluster. That's going to construct your cluster, and you can expand and collapse all the resources here. Look and review what you have created, and then just go ahead and just hit complete. What this is going to do is going to deploy your cluster, and you just have to wait for a few minutes. Probably it should be around a matter of 15-20 minutes for your clusters to come up, and then you can use this cluster.
Are you showing the Argo today, or maybe we're showing that next time, or maybe in the future?
There's going to be a lot of that's another Argo and Arlon are going to be really big features that we are bringing again for 5.6. I think we should do that in another session for this.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll do a follow-up. So why I'm asking that is all this stuff's giving you a YAML, which is helping you template out your clusters, which moves into the next step of going to Argo and using one of our projects called Arlon to deploy your clusters like based on like GitOps and stuff like that, right? Like I can store all this information in GitHub and modify it for whichever cluster type I want, and then just deploy it using Argo CD, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the power we are bringing with Arlon. So if you want to create hundreds of clusters, and if you do not want to use the UI to do it again and again, you can just go use Arlon. And Arlon gives you the same declarative power of cluster API, but with CLI in a form of GitOps fashion. So you can use a GitHub repository or any GitOps compliant repository and store your cluster YAMLs there and create clusters whenever you want.
So then, hey, my developers forget to use tags all the time, so I have no idea who owns these clusters. Now I'm using that, and I'm forcing tags, right? Like, and doing it for them. Say, hey, tell me you want a cluster deployed. Give me some information, and maybe, I don't know, to my DevOps team or my platform team, and they'll deploy it for you and make sure those tags get added. Easier for making sure you know who's creating what.
Absolutely. And in the view of our clusters, which we have added, you can always see the tags. So if you remember, I added this tag environment equals to prod, and you can see it there. That okay, this cluster has this tag.
So now, is this information stored? Where is this? Like, where do I get this information? Do I use the PF9 CLI, or is this information with CAPI, since it's in there? Is it stored somewhere where I can use the kubectl to pull this and maybe get this information about the?
That's a fantastic question, Mike, and I'm glad that you asked that. You've been asking amazing questions today, right? So these resources are stored in our SaaS management plane, and what we have done is that if you want to use upstream cluster API, you'll have to create a separate management cluster, and there you have to install your cluster API components, and then you create these resources in that cluster, and then it goes off to creating workload clusters. What we have done for our customers or for our users is basically remove the concept of whole management cluster. They don't have to take care of the management cluster. We have integrated all the cluster API components right into our SaaS management plane itself. So all the cluster API controllers are running there. So you don't have to worry about don't have to worry about a management cluster at all. Basically, it's not even a term for our users. They just know that cluster API is running in a view, and they can leverage it. And the resources are running there. So if you see what the resources we created this whole cluster, and if you see it's live updating, that it's creating your NAT gateways and your security groups and AWS. It's all visible here. So this is the infrastructure screen where your whole infrastructure on AWS is visible. You can see what's happening, what's the status for it, what all happened till now. There's a detailed view of what's happening. So it's waiting for the control plane to come up. And this, if you see here, infrastructure is waiting for your DNS to resolve. So you have, it's not a black box anymore. You have a detailed view into your clusters, what's happening, and when something goes wrong, this is the place to come and see what's wrong with my cluster. And you can debug it. You can take our help to debug it. So yeah, it should be easy enough to know what's happening to your clusters from here.
So as we add more and more integrations too, that's just going to make it more valuable because you can have it all in one spot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and if you come down, you have the YAML view on the right, as we have maintained, and you have all the details about your clusters on the left side. An amazing thing which we have brought in is that let's look at control plane. Let's say if you wanted to edit your control plane, you could edit your control plane. So you have given options, some of the options to edit your control plane. Once your cluster is ready, if you wanted to change some part of the control plane, you could do so. And the same thing could be done for your node groups as well. So if you come down to your node groups and click on edit, you can configure your node group and update the options on your node group. Once you do that, all the nodes that are part of this node group will get updated with the new configuration. And how they update, it depends on the update strategy that you had already set while you were creating the clusters. So everything is taken care of for you, and you can just view everything here. If you want to update things, you can do. If you are a Power Cluster API user, you've been there in Cluster API for like last 2-3 years, and if you don't understand these YAMLs, you have a YAML view as well, and this YAML view is editable as well. So if you're a Power Cluster API user, this is the shipping fund for you. So you can come in and update any YAMLs which you want, and then this will take effect and update the respective component you're trying to update. So that is what as well we have enabled for our users as well. And if you go back to the dashboard, you can download all the YAMLs with just one click. So if you see, it just zipped all the YAMLs for this cluster and it downloaded that.
So it sounds like cluster API is kind of chicken and the egg. Like I need to have a Kubernetes cluster running to get CAPI running. So we make it a little bit easier to where you're not having to manage your own management cluster, like is what you're saying. That makes it so I can start using CAPI immediately if I log in and have like one of these setups instead of having to, I got to deploy my own Kubernetes cluster and manage that, and then I can start managing other clusters.
Yeah, if you had to use upstream cluster API, you would have to spend 2 hours first to create a cluster, and then install cluster API components onto it, and then make sure they're running, and then you create your cluster YAMLs on top of it to create another workload clusters. We eliminate the whole first part.
We're vanilla, but we're managed, right? To where like we do the upgrades and stuff when new features get added into CAPI, like we're managing that for them.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Do we got anything else to show, or is that kind of we're hitting around time anyways? I think we've done about 50 minutes of stuff. If you got more
I just wanted to show how a created cluster looks like. So yeah, once a cluster gets created, it shows you the amount of resources it's using. It will show your SCD backups if you have configured it on here. If it will show your add-on status, and it will show your node group status if they're running or not. Everything should be just single from here. So yeah. So if you see that we have added a new add-on screen as well, so you can see the status and if they're enabled or not or stuff. Yeah.
Let me add some information about. Okay, so like say you want to know more about this and you want to reach out and talk to us. You can. There's a couple options. You can join our Slack. And you can reach out to me directly if you want. So slack.platform9.io. You can reach out to me. I'm at Petersen. I'm also at Petersen on the Kubernetes Slack channel too, or Kubernetes Slack as well. So if you want to reach out there and say, hey, I want to see a demo of this, or I want to see like a POC or something like that, reach out to us. You can go to our website too and sign up for more information if you want as well. Say if someone's interested, like, oh, this looks cool, let me check it out. A couple of ways you can check it out. Just reach out to us and ask, and we can demo it. I'll be happy to talk to somebody if they want to see this in action. All right, keep going, Anmol. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Mike. So that's really important. The user should know how to reach us. Yeah. And and in the similar fashion, you can just go. I'll just take quickly to our viewers, just to the EKS flow. EKS flow is quite similar. Just name your clusters, EKS 1, 2, 3. And then you just select cloud provider, and you have the same five options to choose. You just choose your availability zone, and when that is done, you can just configure your control plane. So these are all the options that we enable for EKS. So whatever options EKS gives you today to create EKS clusters on AWS console, those are all here. So you can just control the same. You have the same control from here, but you have much more here in terms of, because we are using cluster API. So we're giving you declarative style of creating that, right? And then you can move forward and then choose your worker node groups. With EKS, there are 3 types of worker node groups. So you have 2 types of machine pool there with even advanced properties. So we help users manage normal EC2 instances on EKS. If they want unmanaged node groups, they can use them as well. If they want managed EKS node groups, we have AWS managed machine pool as well. So this corresponds to managed EKS node groups, where you have your whole Kubernetes cluster, all your Kubernetes nodes as managed nodes by EKS, and then you can just configure them here, choose the availability zone which you want, and then this will just go off right off creating those clusters. Once you choose your worker node, you can add Platform9 add-ons on top of your EKS clusters, so that we bring the best value which we have developed for now for the AWS clusters onto EKS as well. So once you hit that, you're just ready to create a EKS cluster, and then this goes off creating your EKS cluster as well. It's going to take some time to create your EKS cluster. Once that is done, you can download your kube config, download cluster YAMLs, anything which you want. Yeah.
So what I could have done too is I could have walked through that and I could have copied the YAML and I could have deployed it. And then what would I do if I deployed it without all of our stuff and then I wanted to import it? Right? Like I can do that too, or like I can create it with the CAPI and then go over to our imported section and import the cluster.
Yeah, the import section, which absolutely good question, Mike. So we are going to add import in a further release, because we've just wanted to show our users the power of cluster API first. So once our users start using the CAPI clusters, they would have this definite need of importing, like creating clusters from existing YAMLs. So we're going to bring that feature soon to that. Yes.
Okay, cool. So that's the benefit, right? Like with us, you can add the add-on stuff if you've already started creating clusters on with EKS clusters with CAPI. You can still import them, so you can still view them in the same pane of glass, right? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yes. This is very good. You can import your clusters. Yeah.
Awesome.
You just come here and just click import cluster, and then you choose EKS, and then
you're definitely probably gonna have people template it, and then they want to put it somewhere and have it automatically do that. Now if I can import it with the command line too, like is it kind of I can automate this a little bit, or am I coming through the UI? Not yet.
Yeah,
okay, feature.
Cluster imports are supported through UI only. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, that's all I had to show for our users for today. Yeah.
All right, let me go ahead and hide your screen then, and then we can do our goodbyes and last thoughts or any additional information you want to add. So Chris, you got anything else to say you want to add?
Well, just that like this CAPI is an amazing add to the Platform9 portfolio, but I think what Anmol will agree with, like we're just starting out. We're going to continue to grow the capabilities of it. We started off with AWS. As we move forward, you'll see additional providers that will add to it. So your options are just going to grow with each release. So we're not stopping here with 5.6. Just as you keep on adding it, like those capabilities and your options are going to multiply.
And if someone has a feature request like that, they can reach out, right? Like they can say, hey, can we get this eventually? Or like we're looking for customer ideas and stuff too, if they have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We eat that stuff up from product management, right? So like, or use cases where like, I love to hear why something works, but if not more, I like to know why something didn't work, right? Where like it just didn't fit their use case. And we start looking at stuff like that and we start asking ourselves questions about it. So that is equally important as well.
Awesome. Anmol, you got anything else you want to add or any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say it's been an exciting release, and we would love to hear from our users once they're trying it. And as Chris said, your feedback is really valuable. So yeah, we're always open to feedback and help you out with anything that you want.
Awesome. Thank you both for your time. Thanks so much. That was interesting. Like I got to ask questions too, because I've seen a little bit of the release, but I haven't seen all the new stuff. So it was fun to kind of ask and see what had changed. I'm waiting for my environment to get upgraded this week, so then I'll check it out. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to us, reach out to us on LinkedIn, reach out to us on Slack. Like if you want to see a demo of this or get more information, comment on LinkedIn or message us directly, any of us, and we'll be happy to talk to you. But thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, like I said, reach out. We'll see y'all next time. Maybe I'll schedule another one where we go over and talk about Argo CD and Arlon and kind of show that off. That's the next step after all this CAPI stuff. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.